Before I turn things over to Marisha to introduce our panelists, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the University of Colorado's land acknowledgement. So now I will read that acknowledgement. We invite you to take a moment to reflect on your relationship to this land of Boulder and relationship to local Indigenous communities as we are guided by the university's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state and in stewardship to land before the establishment of the state into this present moment. CU Boulder humbly acknowledges that it is located on the traditional and current homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native nations and communities. The violent, forced removal of Native people from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. These histories have brought us to the present moment wherein the University of Colorado Boulder is determined to commit to improving and enhancing relationships with Indigenous communities and issues locally and globally. We do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty in their work. We do this by educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge. Finally, we do this by consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with Native communities to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. I want to pass things over to my co-host, Marisha, to keep the program moving forward.
Thank you, Erin. My name is Marisha Lopez. I am the Program Manager for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the College of Arts and Sciences. So this event is hosted by our office, the Office for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, as well as Be Well, which Erin is representing today, and Buffs One Read. Buffs One Read have a ton of resources for those who are interested in engaging students, their units or departments in more conversations around the book Solito or immigration in general. And then I wanted to pass it over to Jenny Gerke, the Associate Dean of Success and Engagement Strategies, just to talk a little bit about the resources that I'm about to link in the chat.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this panel today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Buffs One Read. The Buffs One Read program is a campus-wide read on the book Solito, which we just gave out the 2 copies for. And as you'll see in the chat there, we have a bunch of guides. We have a Canvas course for anybody who's doing instruction who would like to take any pieces of it and put into your classes. We have a guide. And for those of you who are unable to get a copy, if you go to the guide, you'll be able to get access to, we have ebook, audio, and print copies of the book in the library for you to read. We'd really love to have you participate. And with that, I'll pass it back to the wonderful panelists.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you, Buff One Read, and everyone who's here today. My name is Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, pronouns she, her, ella, and I am here to moderate today's panel, which I'm so excited about. Today's panel is inviting us to have a conversation about immigrant issues in Colorado, which there may be some things that you can take outside of Colorado that are relatable to different states and conversations that we're having across the country and outside of CU Boulder. So just want to acknowledge that. For today's panel, we have experts, scholars, practitioners, policymakers, and community leaders that are going to shed light on current immigration policies, their impacts on local communities, and the evolving landscape of immigration in Colorado. We hope today's conversation can provide valuable insight and foster meaningful dialogue on how we can address immigration issues and leverage opportunities for positive change in Colorado. So, Marisha, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce our panel today.
So today we have with us Jorge de Santiago from El Centro Amistad in Boulder. We have Deep Bulasek Karam from CU Boulder School of Law. We have Lisa Martinez from University of Denver. We also have Stephanie Lee and Guillermo Ramirez Ruiz from the Center for Inclusion and Social Change here at CU Boulder. So I'm going to go ahead and spotlight everyone now, and we will get things underway.
Thank you so much, Marisha. Thank you to our panelists for being here today. We are looking forward to having these difficult conversation. Well, not difficult. I would say it's a conversation that a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about. I know myself growing up in an immigrant household, both of my parents came to America, and this was something that felt different for me. I was raised in Mexico. And so for myself, although I don't identify as an immigrant, coming to America at a later age, I felt like I was always experiencing what my parents experienced. And so I always remember feeling like, you know, this is America, speak English. As a child whose English is not the first language, but also experience a lot of things where conversations were happening and policy were coming about that impacted my family directly. And so don't want to make this about my family. I want to make this about Colorado and understanding what we can be doing together to make this better. So I'm going to pass it over to all of our panelists. And if it's okay with everyone, just want to talk about the misconceptions. I know I saw that there was a conversation with different celebrities, and it's not about celebrities, but understanding how we can use our platform. And I noticed that there were conversations happening about a statement that was made, you know, immigrants eat dogs, they just come to a country and they're eating animals, right? And so we had celebrities talking about how that's not correct. It's a misconception, it's a myth. And so just want to invite you all to think about, when we think about Colorado and we think about misconceptions, Colorado and misconceptions or myths, what are some of the myths that you have heard here in the state or just in general about immigrant population? So Jorge, we're going to start off with you.
Thank you, Patricia. Hello, everyone. My name is Jorge Santiago. My pronouns are he, his, and him, él. I'm the director of the Centro Amistad, a nonprofit organization here in Boulder, Colorado. Our mission is technically provide equity education to all families in Boulder County, families with children. I think one of the things when you start talking, I've been working in the field for 23 years. I'm an immigrant myself. And when you say immigrant, technically, when you mention, you know, that word, that's a technical conversation that is happening right now, especially with our youth population or the teenagers. We really need to make and understand that we're not immigrants. We were here, man. You know, like we didn't came from nowhere. You know, like one song say, the line was drawn in Mexico and the United States, technically, but we're not immigrants. This is our land. We have to understand this to start right there. I mean, that's the conversation. That's how we start the conversation in our communities now. I mean, we fight so hard from the beginning, really advocating for our rights. Yes, immigrant rights and everything. Yes, we have rights. We need human rights, technically. You know, saying that we are classified as immigrants in this country, I don't think so. I mean, I consider myself immigrant because that's with the box they put us on. But technically, this is our land. You know, we have to adjust. We have to fight for our land technically still. And now more than ever, you know, these attacks against our communities are terrible, especially right now with the presidential race. The same message again, you know, for the ex-president of the United States, really giving the wrong message to the people. I mean, what you just mentioned, the myth that people is eating cats and dogs and everything. Come on, man. I mean, this is insane to say that. I mean, we live in a world where we have a lot of conflicts everywhere, but when we come to the United States, you know, we have a lot of things dealing with. And I think immigration issue is one of the biggest one, if not the biggest one in North Continent, technically. Now that we used to have just immigrants or people moving to the United States from Mexico, Central America. Now we have a whole wave from South America over here. So what that says to you? You know, things are changing. And when we come to this country, I say, we're coming back, we're taking our land. You know, that's how we say. Another thing, another myth we hear a lot, and I've been hearing this for years, man. I moved to the United States. I just want to mention this back in 1986. So I have been here more than half of my life, and since then, the same message has been there. Immigrants stealing jobs for Americans. Well, guess what? We're not stealing jobs. We're here to work, of course, and we do the work that a lot of people don't want to do. So that's the truth. And we're not here to ask for any free stuff. We're here for work. So the myth of we taking jobs away from people, I remember back in the 80s, 1989, that was a big thing saying that in California, it was Mexico again. They were retaking, Mexicans were taking California again, especially jobs. So guess what? Well, they were taking jobs that were not getting paid well. They were not getting paid at all, but they were still working and performing. So a lot of those workers, that they actually put food in our tables, we don't even think about it. So that job, I don't think just anybody, any United States citizen will do it just for a few cents, few dollars, or sometimes for free. So those are kind of the myths that we see. It's a lot of abuse going on for different communities in Colorado. But right now, more than anything, I will say, all these new families, new immigrants, new community members coming to our country, especially to Colorado, I think what we need to do is really support them in a way and then welcome them, because this is not going to stop. Immigration is flowing all over the world, but in our continent, what I said is just something that is incredible. I mean, this is something that I haven't seen in close to 30 years. The amount of people moving across the continent coming for different reasons. So that's the first thing that we need to understand. What are we moving to this country, really? Every person has a different reason. We're not coming here because, hey, this is great, but I didn't want to leave my country. I have my own reasons. So everybody has their own story. So all those myths that we see, we have to confront them. We have to talk, and we have to, tell the truth. And I think the truth is ours. We have to tell the real story. And right now, more than anything, we have to really cultivate that story, those values, to our younger population, the new generation that's coming here. So.
Thank you so much, Jorge. And with that, Doctora Martinez, want to pass it over to you. If you want to add, so the question for those of you who just joined, we're talking about misconceptions or myths that we've heard about immigration populations, or even just here in Colorado regarding immigration.
Yes, thank you. First, I'd like to say thank you to Doctora Gonzalez and all of the CU team for inviting me to be a part of this panel today. Just to add a little bit to the introductions that Marisha shared at the beginning of the hour, I'm a faculty member in the Department of Sociology and Criminology at the University of Denver, and I also co-direct the Center for Immigration Policy and Research. And in my work, even though I tend to focus a great deal on the impact of law and policy, specifically on undocumented youth and young adults, much of my teaching often speaks to a lot of these myths that we're talking about here today, including the ones that, of course, Jorge mentioned just a moment ago. I would say that perhaps one of the other really big myths about immigrants, not just this notion of immigrants coming to the U.S. and taking jobs away from citizens, is this notion of immigrant criminality. And what we find is that this is a pretty consistent attitude that Americans tend to have about immigrant newcomers. People who are recently arrived to the U.S. are often met with suspicion, and as we're seeing play out in Springfield, Ohio, often with very racist, xenophobic rhetoric about those immigrant groups. So in many respects, this is not new. We know this from throughout history. We see that it's different groups that might be the targets of this vitriol, but of course, the vitriol itself is not different than what we've seen. And perhaps this myth is like many of the other myths, quickly dispelled if you look at the actual data. The data that I've seen, that I've used in my classes, that I know from conversations with colleagues who focus on this area of research specifically, is that the myth of immigrant criminality is in fact a myth. There was a study that was very recently published by a team at Stanford University where they looked at incarceration rates from the late 1800s to more recently. And they focus specifically on incarceration rates because, of course, to be incarcerated, there has to be a conviction. And so they wanted to compare the incarceration rates of immigrants relative to US-born citizens over the various sort of waves of migration to the United States. And again, not surprisingly, they've consistently found that undocumented immigrants have lower incarceration rates of all people in the United States relative to US citizens. Just recently, the National Institute of Justice published a report showing very similar findings, only their focus was on rates of offending. And they found that US citizens had the highest rates relative to documented immigrants, and then far below those relative to undocumented immigrants. So this is a very popular misconception that gets out there. It's thrown around. It's very intentional in terms of the purpose that this rhetoric is trying to serve, at least by the people who are using it, to try to paint immigrants as others, as people we should be suspicious or wary of, as people we should be worried that they're committing crimes in our neighborhood. And again, the data just doesn't show that to be the case. So that's another really big one. And I'm sure during the course of the conversation today, there will be many ways in which these myths connect back to what's happening in Springfield. And if anything, I would sort of suggest that rather than being the perpetrators of crimes, what we're seeing now, and as we've seen at other points in history, is that immigrants are also more likely to be the targets of crime. So that's a really important thing, I think, to sort of get out right off the bat in terms of this particular notion that's so pervasive, even though there's really not any evidence to support it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez. Deep, I want to pass it over to you with your constitutional law knowledge and the courses that you've taught as well and your practice in law. Is there anything you want to add when it comes to the misconceptions or myths that arise when discussing immigrant communities?
So first of all, thank you for having me. As mentioned, I teach constitutional law and immigration law at CU Boulder. I'm going to talk about, let me first comment on what my co-panelists have just said, and then I'll talk about another myth that's worth thinking about. As we started off talking about economy and jobs and working, and it's certainly true that migrants, as a general matter, do not take jobs from anybody, as most labor economists will tell you. They're a net boon to the American economy. I do think it's worth being clear and clear about what the evidence says. There's a very famous labor economist at Harvard whose studies do show that at the level where you're talking about competition for jobs with Americans without high school, citizens without high school degrees, there is some level of substitution between migrants and that group. But that is not to take away at all from the overall point that migrants in general are a huge boon to the economy, usually complementary to United States workers, not substituting for US workers. On the points that Lisa was just making, so true. What to me is more fascinating is that Congress in 1920s impaneled a commission for the purpose of studying the nexus between immigrants and crimes, then at that time worried about Southern and Eastern European migration into major cities as part of the Industrial Revolution, attempting at that time consciously to substantiate the link between immigrants and crime. And, perhaps no surprise to many people on this call, their report published in 1926 could not substantiate the link. And that is a finding that has been true, as Lisa said, for the last 100 years. And it's replicated even if you focus purely on the unlawfully present population. And that evidence is not in controversy, unless, of course, you're somebody from the Center for Immigration Studies. I don't know if any of those people have found their way onto this call. If they have, your data is nonsense. and the only people who've ever cited it are yourselves on your own website, not in peer-reviewed academic journals with any merit. But really what I wanted to say about that was only that what is more interesting to me than the actual debunking of that myth is how sticky it is and how easy it is to replicate it in 2024 and how fast it spreads as the truth. The final thing I'll say is just unique to what I was going to say is that one of the presidential candidates has said that they will deport everyone if elected. And I'd say that is by itself a misconception, in that it is actually not possible to deport everyone in the United States who is unlawfully present in the United States, at least not with current resources for removal. Just for background, there are roughly 11 million unlawfully present people in the United States. For those people wondering where I get that data, it is from the Pew Research Center, which is probably houses the best demographers and groundbreaking demographers on the question of unlawful presence in this country. 11 million unlawfully present, the most number of people that the United States has ever removed in a single year is roughly a little over 400,000 people. That was in the third year of the Obama presidency. So think about those two numbers, a little over 400,000 and 11 million people eligible to be removed. That is less than 4% of the removable population in the United States when the United States removal resources are being used at their absolute maximum. 96% of people are not going to be removed unless there's some, quadruple, 10 times, 20 times, 100 times change in the enforcement budget of the United States, which is not going to happen today, tomorrow, or anytime in the near future. That is all to say that the idea of some sort of mass deportation is unlikely to happen, although it is something that gets a lot of people impassioned and ready to go. What can happen, though, is indiscriminate removal as opposed to prioritized removal, and I'm happy to address that later in question and answer.
Thank you so much, Deep, and for dropping anything. If you have links for the panelists, feel free to add them to the chat as well. And so Stephanie and Guillermo, you both have an extensive wealth of knowledge working with students, and you also have heard firsthand stories from students. But I want to gauge from you all, is there any misconceptions that either of you or both of you want to address today or share with the community today? Stephanie, I want to start with you if you just want to share something with the community today.
Yeah, thank you. And to just introduce myself, my name's Stephanie Lee. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a program manager for our Asian Pacific Islander Desi American students in the Center for Inclusion and Social Change at CU Boulder. And a lot of my background in the last couple of years has been working with students in higher education, in the community college level and at the university level. I've worked with a lot of students who are students of color, undocumented students, low income, and now specifically working with our Asian student population at CU Boulder. And so there's a misconception that there's a belief that all immigrants are undocumented or lack legal status. And I think that frankly dehumanizes folks who are immigrants and is a blanket statement, for all immigrants who are in this country. There, as some of the folks on this panel have mentioned before, I think we really need to think about the reason as to why immigrants are coming to this country. That's a lot of what I focus in my job when I'm talking to students is, what is their reasoning for coming to college? How can we get to understand their story a lot better, their motivations and their goals to support them and help them be successful. The reality is there are a lot of immigrants with a variety of different statuses. Something, Memo and I specifically, in our roles as program managers, support students within the identities that we support. We support undocumented students. And so there's a reason why I support undocumented students as part of my role. 20% of the undocumented students who identify who are eligible for asset in the state of Colorado, so who are eligible for in-state tuition at CU Boulder, do identify as Asian. That just kind of feeds a little bit more into why we need to understand the story behind, our immigrants and especially for our students. A lot of immigrants also hold other statuses, maybe permanent residents or visa holders. Some of our undocumented immigrants may also have DACA. And so again, I think it just pushes the reasoning that, we really truly need to understand what their story is, the reason why they're coming, and, understand like the different paths towards citizenship. So, yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. Guillermo, I want to pass it over to you.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Gracias, Doctora Gonzalez and your team for hosting us today and gathering us together. My name is Guillermo Ramirez. My pronouns are he, him, and él. Born and raised from Colorado, Aurora, Colorado to be specific. Been in the field of higher education, being an advocate, being an educator for our students for about 7 years now. And so I've worked many places in Colorado, from the Community College of Aurora, Metropolitan State University, Denver, the University of Denver, Colorado Boulder, and my alma mater, Colorado State University. Go Rams, but go Buffs because it's homecoming week this week. Another misconception that we hear within our students, but also within our own personal families, is DACA and undocumented students don't pay taxes. That is a completely false misconception. If anything, these students our undocumented students are working full-time jobs during getting their undergraduate degree or their graduate degree to ensure that they're paying those payment plans and ensuring that they're able to register for that next semester. And they're required to pay those federal, local income taxes. And it's funny because they have to pay these taxes, yet they don't benefit from receiving back. For example, if a student is just undocumented and doesn't have DACA and they want to work at CU Boulder, we need to make sure that the money is not coming from the federal government because we just can't pay our undocumented students that way. And we need to find those alternative work ways, like finding stipends or other ways to ensure our undocumented students, DACA students, can get paid for a student job. And I think some of these things I also hear from my father, so being a little vulnerable. I come from a family of immigrants, and my dad is a permanent resident, as so is my mom. And so they crossed the border and came here to give my brother and me a better life. But sometimes it's kind of that their own generation of needing to unlearn everything that they were learned in the past. And so my dad's a little bit always saying like they never pay taxes, but I'm just like, Appa, like dad, like those are our people, they're our gente. Why are you like why are you thinking like this? But it's just so hard for him at his age to unlearn everything that he was taught to be true. And so I also share with you all to kind of have some of those conversations with your families, with your friends and your loved ones. They're not easy to have, but I think as the more time that we could spend talking about some of these things and correcting some of these myths, especially with our loved ones, it goes a long way for our community, our people, and for our students right now who are trying to receive their higher education degree.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. And as you mentioned, Aurora, Colorado, I couldn't stop thinking about the misconception or myth about the Venezuela gangs taking over. If you have not heard about it, Google it. A lot of people are having conversations, particularly here in Colorado, about what was said and how it's not true. And so with that, I want to talk about the policies, the federal conversations that are happening. So Lisa and Deep, I want to engage you into this question. What are the key federal state immigration policies currently affecting Colorado? I keep saying Colorado, whatever you prefer, right? And so how have recent legislative changes or proposed reforms influenced these policies? And what are some of the most pressing legal challenges faced by immigrants, refugees, and undocumented individuals and DACA recipients in the state? So that was a long question, but we're going to add it in the chat for you to reference. We want to start with you, Doctora Martinez. What would you add when you're thinking about policy and the question about federal and state conversations?
Well, I want to pick up on some strands that both Stephanie and Guillermo mentioned in terms of thinking about right here in Colorado, and specifically with regard to DACA. I am actually in the final stages of finishing a book on the impact of DACA and asset on Colorado youth and young adults. And one of the things that became very clear in the process of collecting and analyzing data for the book is the impact that it had, of course, not only in terms of young people's educational prospects, and also in terms of their economic prospects as far as their ability to gain work, to find careers and professions that were commensurate with their levels of education. And so through interviews with over 60 DACA recipients, it was quite revealing in terms of the impact that the policy had. And not just based on sort of Colorado specifically, but various studies from colleagues doing this kind of work across the country showed the real impact that it had, at least as far as their economic prospects and also on their social mobility. So one of the things that has consistently been shown, of course, is that with improved educational opportunities and economic opportunities, DACA recipients were increasingly able to purchase homes. They were able to increase their spending power. They were able to increase their contributions in the form of mortgage payments to the sum of hundreds of millions of dollars. A couple of billions of dollars in terms of rental payments annually, federal taxes, state and local taxes, right? These are all part of the benefits of having a program in place that essentially provides those pathways to opportunity. And that, coupled with asset, which has since been sort of revised as recently as 2022, those two things combined have had a tremendous benefit in terms of people's of young people's ability to attain social mobility. Of course, we know that in 2017, the Trump administration rescinded DACA. And so now we're in a place where it's only those former recipients who are able to renew and not taking on new ones. And so this kind of gets to your larger question in terms of federal policy by virtue of the fact that DACA was not a federal policy, not a bill or a law signed by Congress, but rather an executive action. Of course, it was subject to repeal and to essentially stopping or halting the implementation of the program. And that's going to have reverberation effects in terms of thinking about the long-term prospects of the young people who are in our state. I once came across a sobering statistic that said the majority of Colorado's professional workers, employees in tech industry and finance and so forth in higher education come from out of state. So we're essentially importing a lot of that professional class, so to speak, rather than investing in the young people of our state, which includes, countless young people who have varying immigration and legal statuses. So I think in a lot of respects, asset was sort of a way to sort of address that in some ways, but by virtue of the fact that it's a state level policy, absent a federal policy, then it's sort of limited in terms of its more far-reaching implications. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback on those comments that my co-panelists were mentioning, because that's a really big piece. We know that education, of course, is a really big factor in terms of improving people's prospects, in terms of their ability to contribute to the economy, and all of those things that we sort of assume in terms of what education gets us. But if we're not able to align those with things that are happening at the federal level, then they're going to be stymied in terms of their overall impact.
Thank you so much, Doctora Martinez, for all of that and adding the conversation about what can we do to keep generating opportunities here in Colorado for our youth. I think that's, as someone from out of state, we're obviously thinking about how can we do more for in-state people here in Colorado, but thank you for reminding people here, what can we do? If you're someone hiring, if you're someone in a position of doing opportunity or making opportunities or creating opportunities, please take that into consideration. So Deep, I'll stop talking. I want to pass it to you. Is there anything you would like to add as we think about federal and state policies or conversations?
Yeah, so the question as posed and as posted in the chat, so it's a very large question. It is possible, because I know I do this, teach an entire class on the relationship between the federal and state governments and state leeway to engage in all sorts of policy making. But I'll start with where Dr. Martinez left off, and that is that DACA for now is limited to the recipients that have had it before. But the fact is, it really doesn't matter who wins the the election with regards to DACA, because DACA is also being challenged in a federal court case. And when that federal court case gets to the Supreme Court, given the current composition of the court, it is highly likely that DACA will be ruled as unlawful, even if it continues to protect those people who already had it. But that will be a diminishing group going into the future, eventually getting down to zero. So then the question is, what can possibly replace at the federal level DACA or something like that for purposes of helping or ameliorating the concerns of unlawfully present people? And the only answer to that is really congressional legislation that could overnight, if it wanted to, normalize the status of millions of people unlawfully in the United States. That is easy to say, nearly impossible to do. And if I was giving out predictions, I would tell you, don't hold your breath for the next decade or so, that there will be any form of federal legislation that would actually affect that would actually improve the status or normalize the status of unlawfully present people. Or any other large forms of immigration reform at the federal level. It's certainly ambitious and aspirational and good to hope for. As a matter of real politics, it is highly unlikely to happen. Happy to address at some later point why that is so. Now, there are two consequences of that legislative stasis at that federal level. One, presidents become much more important in setting immigration enforcement policy, including things like trying to create DACA. And two, states and counties and cities become extremely important, right? Why? Because they can fill in the gaps that federal law does not expressly prohibit them from engaging in. And that's the reason you have states like Colorado. California used to be the vanguard of this. Now states like Colorado, Illinois, New York, Maryland, a few other places are also on board with pro-immigrant integrationist types of policies. But you can see things like policies that restrict federal immigration enforcement, so-called sanctuary policies, more affirmative policies like healthcare provision for non-citizens, education financing for non-citizens, allowing non-citizens, regardless of status, to attend state public universities, get professional licensing within the state, driver's licenses, right? These are all state level policies controlled at the state level that people can advocate for at the local, county, and state levels, and that are not forbidden by federal law. And really the challenge there is convincing local politicians and local elected officials that this is well worth their time and energy to invest in migrants. I do think, just I'll end with this, I think those efforts are going to be more difficult going forward because of things like the busing of migrants from other jurisdictions into Colorado, which you can go to Denver and see, right? It creates concerns. It creates possibilities of unhoused people, strains the social networks and social resources of that place. And so the efforts to create more integrationist policies, I think right now are at a standstill in most states because of the concern that it will be an attraction for other states like Florida and Texas to ship migrants into more welcoming jurisdictions. That's happening in New York. It's happening in Denver. But there is leeway for states and localities to act in that way.
Thank you so much, Steve. So much information and a lot of misconceptions too that you helped address in that just answer. So thank you for all of that. Jorge, I want to pass it over to you with your extensive work in the community and the work. You get to meet and interact with many groups, including organizations and advocacy groups that play a role in supporting immigrants in Colorado. And can you provide examples of successful community initiatives or programs that have positively impact immigration populations here in Colorado or across the states?
Yes, Patricia, thank you. I think one of the things that I'm very proud to be part, Amistad was one of the founders of the Colorado Immigrants Rights Coalition back in 20 years ago, 22 years ago, something like that. It was almost at the same time when Amistad was founded as well. So the need to really have a coalition of organizations and individuals advocating for immigrants' rights in Colorado was because at that time we were being attacked, around, we were organizing around driver's license for undocumented immigrants around in Colorado. And we were attacked all the time here in Boulder, Longmont, in the county, across Colorado, every organization or individual supporting immigrants, we were attacked, with death threats, you name it. So having a coalition, a statewide coalition of organizations, individuals really advocating for immigrants' rights was the idea. Really have a political body that really advocate for our rights in Colorado. So since then, the coalition has grown so much, really providing support to local organizations. We can strategize, lobbying to a specific legislation that we want to support across the state. But one of the things that I think is crucial is really understanding the needs of these new immigrants, or just in general the immigrant community. And I will say, since the pandemic hit Colorado, or just United States, things changed, at least in Boulder County, where we were able to push systems that were not really available for our communities, where we started with equity clinics to provide for undocumented immigrants, for all the immigrant communities in their own language, culturally appropriate COVID vaccination clinics, so people can feel welcome. That was just an example that we work with Boulder County Public Health and a couple other nonprofits in Boulder to really create that. It took us 3 months to get there. So it took us longer to get our community vaccinated. So that's an example of inequities that are happening because those systems doesn't exist. Another example is back in 2015, we start seeing the priorities of our community. Yes, immigration is one of the biggest ones. Our community needs to work. But on top of that, we cannot do much because this becomes over our heads, very political. Every year is talks. We're going to have an immigration reform. We're going to have blah, blah, blah. Politicians are just talking, man, but nothing is happening. So we concentrated on the immediate needs of our community. So we did an assessment. And I think something that we did an assessment back in 2014 is still real right now. The two biggest priorities for our communities was housing and mental health. So if you look at the needs right now for all those communities, housing and mental health have been on top of everything. So we have been working with local cities, with local governments, and other nonprofits to really create those systems that we can provide that support to our communities, especially around mental health. Mental health has been one of the biggest impacts for every single immigrant in our communities. So creating systems that really provide. We passed in 2016 a tax initiative in Boulder, taxing the sugary drinks in the city of Boulder. That tax in the city of Boulder is generating $5 million a year. That funding goes towards health equity work in the city of Boulder. All those families who are getting the benefit of those the programs available from mental health, wellness, education, access to healthcare is provided by nonprofits without funding. A lot of those families, unfortunately, they don't have health insurance. They're undocumented status. So everything is for free. So now seeing everything is being done since the pandemic to now in terms of supporting those families, especially with lack of access to healthcare in general, has been incredible. How it is possible to come together and really support those communities, creating systems like that just mentioned. Locally we can create strategies that we can support those families. Our goal as nonprofits, as an immigrant, as a part of the community, is provide that wellness settings for all families with children, especially families with children. The negative impact that everything is happening around us is impacting the mental health well-being of the children, the families. So on top of immigration, this is killing our families. Their health is going downhill. So how do we balance that? So the work that we have been doing in our communities, all the nonprofits, local governments, really providing the wellness platform so these families can be healthier as they adapt into the new city. All these new families that we try to provide and connect them to resources. Yes, Boulder County is, in terms of resources, we are on top of a lot of other counties, unfortunately, or fortunately, you will say. But it's models that you can take from one county to a different county. It's just the willingness of really work together for a community that really deserves our support. That's to me that those ideas really rally with universities. We work closely with a lot of student groups at the University of Colorado to really support all the students, Latino students at the middle and high school level. Why? Because we need that connection. So I would say that something that we can do is unify our communities to support new immigrants, newcomers, new families, and anyone who really needs support in our community. Because living in Boulder, a really wealthy city, not everyone has access to wellness here. Not everyone has access to healthcare. So now think about, they already have issues of not having documentation. They don't have employment. They don't have housing. So it's layers of stress that you put out in these individuals. So we need to care for those families with their immediate needs. Immigration, politics, legislation is going to happen. When? I don't know. But this is out of our hands. We have to keep pushing our legislators, tell them this is what we need. And just remember, those legislators were elected by us. So they work for us. They don't let them do whatever they want to do because they want to accommodate their priorities for somebody else. So I think it's just having a voice together in our communities as nonprofits, individuals, educational entities, advocates. It really brings the conversation together. We've been working around immigrant integration process since 1999 in the city of Boulder. So slow changes, but changes have been made. But I feel that we still have a lot of work to do, but we are in a different position right now. I think we have a lot more people aware of what is happening and willing to really work and support our communities in Boulder County.
Thank you so much, Jorge, and for reminding us of systemic justice and making sure that this is not just one individual's work, but communities being involved in this work. So thank you for the reminder and also plugging in opportunities for people to get involved if you're in Colorado. So we'll include everyone's contact information so that you can follow up with Jorge or anyone here in the panel today as well. Thank you, Jorge. So with that, I'm looking at the time and I don't want to rush. So I just want to pass it over to folks who are in education. I know we have some educators in the space. I want to learn, how do I support my students more, or what can I do to do more for the students here at CU Boulder or across any school that they're attending. And so I want to ask Guillermo and Stephanie, if you can share, in your roles working directly with students, what specific barriers do DACA recipients, refugees, or mixed status families, even undocumented students face when accessing higher education, and how can educational institutions enhance their support to help these students overcome these challenges without having to put the ownership on students, but rather the institution taking some responsibility? If you have an example of stories that you want to share, please feel free to do so. Stephanie, I want to pass it over to you to kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. I think frankly, like, our higher education system is the barrier to our students. It's a complex system. When students first come to the university, it's a long to-do list. And for our undocumented students or immigrant students or mixed status families, that to-do list is even longer. I think there's a lot of fear in learning how to navigate the system. A lot of our students are also first generation. For example, when you're applying to financial aid, like, do you need to apply for FAFSA or do you need to apply to the state of Colorado financial aid, and why? Who would qualify? What would happen if I did both? Things like that. Some of our students get misclassified. Their residency status for tuition gets misclassified, and we have to figure out, what forms do I need to fill out? What do I need to bring in? Like, what do my parents need to do? And so those are just some examples of some of the extra hoops, the extra barriers our students have to jump through in order to just even get to classes, and in order to even just start their education at the university level. I think our students also need to figure out, who the heck do I ask? I think when I recently came from MSU Denver, and when I compare my own work experience from MSU Denver to CU Boulder, it's a stark difference. Like I had culture shock when I came here because I didn't know who I could ask for help. And so when I think about students and for myself, identifying staff who are knowledgeable and informed on specific processes to support our students, that's a huge barrier. I think that that's something that we can work on at the institution, is to inform our staff, not just point people, but entire staff. I think that we sometimes tend to rely on a single person, or in our case, two people. But I think that more people need to be informed in order to support our students. Yeah, so I think that's, that's how we can help them start to overcome challenges. I think another huge challenge that I know that a lot of folks have been working on, we've talked about students who are eligible for asset, eligible for in-state tuition on campus. There was recently students or folks are able to get professional licensure in Colorado, but there's a gap. Students can't work still. And our students, as we've mentioned, students are trying to pay their bills, trying to pay tuition, but they can't work, and they can't work on campus. But they can get, a degree, they can get their licensure. But for some licensure, for example, I was just talking to some students. I was like, I know you need to get clinical hours. Like, I know you need to get supervision hours. And that's something that we are going to have to think about in the future. This is a gamble, right? Like, in order to go from A to B. And, there's uncertainty, and if they can even obtain their licensure, because we're not able to work. So that's one of the biggest issues like our students are facing, and that I get a lot of questions about, is like, how can I get a job on campus? How can I get job experience in order to even get a job with my degree? That's one of the most common challenges. And I know I definitely need to connect with some folks on this panel on, how can we get our students connected to internships that will pay them, work experience that will pay them. I really like that Lisa mentioned, what happens when you do support folks at the financial level as well. Like, unfortunately, CU Boulder is not a Dream.US scholarship school, but previously when I was at institutions who had a scholarship that paid for not just tuition, but also paid for books and provided students with a network, and also provide students with a fellowship to pay for, an internship. They have their numbers like on their website, like students are highly successful, students are retained, and students, like over 90% of their students, like get jobs after college. So these are just some of the things I think about in terms of challenges and what can be done.
Thank you, Stephanie. Guillermo, I want to pass it over to you. I know don't worry about the time. If folks want to stay with us, and we will continue the conversation, but I want to pass it over to you. Is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I'll go very, very quickly. I echo everything what my colleague Stephanie mentioned. Literally all of that. And Stephanie has a great way of communicating it out instead of I do. And so thank you, Stephanie. But one thing I did want to touch some time on is also like, how can we as educational institutions enhance the support to our undocumented students overall? And something that Stephanie and I have learned at Boulder is, we're not we're maybe where we should be at in supporting our undocumented students as some of our counterparts in the state of Colorado. But we do want to like give those thanks and those kudos to those people who did start their work at CU Boulder, because they noticed that no work was being done. And so really it was like kind of like out of grassroots and from different folks of the institution. And so like Violeta Chapman from the law school is a huge advocator at our institution, and basically started a lot of the things that we have today. Fernando Rios Mena, Karu Bolding, and then our former counterpart, Stephanie Roberts. It really was that team that really brought CU Boulder to where we are today. Again, we're not perfect, but with one of those initiatives that they created was the Undocu Network, which Stephanie and I are currently in the works of reimagining what that looks like as we just started these positions. And what it has been a support of folks who want to advocate for the undocumented student experience and to ensure that we are giving these students all the resources that they need. We currently, I feel like the Undocu Network has done great work at the institution. We've made some Undocu guides. We made a career Undocu guide with partnership with Career Services. But we kind of hit a wall where we're just kind of staff and faculty members are just kind of yelling at each other because the institution, Boulder, is not doing what maybe they should be doing. And so Stephanie and I had the exciting opportunity to kind of organize again the Undocu Network and work with some key people at the institution. And a majority, Stephanie, submitted some recommendations that we're getting edited right now to get to the chancellor's desk, our new chancellor, Justin, to formalize the Undocu Network and to get that support from CU Boulder, because it's been such a grassroots initiative. It's been staff members who are leaving CU Boulder, and then it's like, where are we again? And so we are finally, hopefully, going to get an answer if it's a yes or if it's a no. But at least we know what direction we go towards to. We are also going to be restarting our Undocu Ally training pretty soon, most likely next month. So that has been on a pause, and as Stephanie and I have been relearning our positions. But no, yeah, just a lot of great things that are happening currently right now, and excited to be on this call.
Thank you, Guillermo, and thank you all to all of our panelists today. We had so many more questions. I think we're gonna have to have a part 2, but just want to, before I turn off the camera and open it for questions for everyone, just want to thank our panelists for their time, for their knowledge. I heard a few things, right? Getting involved by even starting to dispel misconceptions that are happening around us, even with the people that we love, right? What does it look like to hold them accountable, to do the research, but also to help them understand what we're hearing is not all true, to understanding legislation, right? Jorge nailed it, right? We are the ones electing. How do we hold people accountable at that level to make sure that policies and procedures are aligning with what we need or the community needs? And then, of course, Deep reminded us of the Constitution, right? There are rights that people cannot violate just because we woke up and said, everybody got to go, right? We have to be knowledgeable of those rights. And maybe those are not conversations that are accessible to everyone, but what can we do to bring that up is something that I want to hold everyone accountable. Doctora Martinez is doing phenomenal research, and I can't wait to share the book with you all next year or this year when it's published, but reminding ourselves of creating opportunities here in Colorado for specifically youth, right? The generation that we want to continue to build and keep here in Colorado if possible. And of course, Stephanie and Guillermo reminded us of access to education. It's not just about attending a university, it's about holding institutions and systems accountable for making sure that they're prepared to support students who are undocumented. And so thank you all so much.